Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Food and Drug Administration's listening session, Optimizing FDA's Use of and Processes for Advisory Committees. I'm Dale Crescenzio, the Director of Stakeholder Engagement within the FDA's Office of External Affairs, and I will be moderating today's public meeting. Next slide, please. For today's agenda, we will first hear from FDA Commissioner Robert Califf and FDA Principal Deputy Commissioner Nnamdi Bumpus. After their opening remarks, we will proceed with the oral comment portion of the meeting, beginning with Topic 1, Composition of Advisory Committees. Next slide. After Topic 1, presentations conclude, we will break for lunch for an hour starting at noon. After noon, we will proceed with Topics 2 and 3, Service on an Advisory Committee as a Special Government Employee, and Public Perception and Understanding of Advisory Committees, respectively. We have two 10-minute breaks built into today's full schedule, one each for morning and afternoon portions. Once all presenters have had a chance to provide their oral comments, with or without slides, we will discuss next steps and adjourn for the day by or before 4 p.m. And now I have a few general announcements to go over before we begin. We have over 700 people who have registered to attend today's virtual meeting, with over 50 people who will be presenting. This is a large virtual public meeting, and we have made every effort to make sure it runs smoothly. However, unexpected issues do happen, and if they do so, please bear with us as we will correct them as quickly as possible. Public meetings are public administrative proceedings and are subject to FDA policy and procedures for electronic media coverage. Representatives of the electronic media are permitted, subject to certain limitations, to videotape, film, or otherwise record FDA public procedures, including the presentations of the speakers today. The meeting will also be transcribed, and copies of the transcripts can be ordered through the docket or accessed on our website approximately 30 days after the meeting. In addition, the webcast of the meeting will be recorded, and a copy of that recording should be available on our website in the next 2 weeks. During today's Zoom webinar, all microphones will be disabled, except for my microphone, and each presenter's microphone as they present. If you have a technical issue, please send a note through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Our technical support team will be in touch with you as soon as possible. And also, please note that the chat and video functions will be disabled. We don't want any interruptions for the presenters and ask that everyone be respectful of them during today's meeting. For our speakers, as stated, all microphones will be disabled except for my microphone and your microphone as you present. At the appropriate time, I'll introduce you so that you can begin your presentation. So that we can easily find you, please make sure that your name is clearly written in your profile. For those with slides, our technical support team will upload them and advance them for you. When it is time to advance the slides, please say next slide. Please be mindful of your fellow presenters' time and do not go over your allotted 5 minutes. We have a full agenda today with over 50 speakers and must stay within the time limitations in order to end on time. If you have not concluded your remarks in the allotted 5-minute time period, I apologize in advance, but I will interrupt you and ask you to stop. And I will be emphasizing this throughout the day. Your comments and presentations today will be included in the public docket, but if you run out of time and don't get to complete your remarks, please submit additional information to the public docket for consideration. Please also pay attention to the agenda, which will be projected throughout the day and was emailed to speakers, and also can be found on the meeting webpage on fda.gov. To help the transcribers identify who is speaking, please be sure to clearly state your name and affiliation at the beginning of your remarks. Please also speak clearly and succinctly so that you can be heard by others and help us capture your comments in an accurate manner. Next slide. And with that, I'd now like to introduce our distinguished commissioner, Dr. Robert Califf, to provide some opening remarks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Califf.
Thanks, Dale. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today to give input on a topic important to all of us, FDA's use of and processes for advisory committees. For over 50 years, FDA has relied on advisory committees for external advice from scientific, public health, and medical experts, as well as representatives of industry, consumers, and patients. While our regulatory decisions are made by FDA career staff, our advisory committees are a vital resource in helping us as we evaluate complicated issues related to drugs, devices, and other FDA-regulated products, both before and after they go on the market. Of note, the majority of the thousands of decisions that FDA makes every year do not go to an advisory committee. Today, we're discussing the issues and products with more complexity than the usual, a situation in which external advice is highly valuable. Our advisory committees don't just advise on issues related to specific product applications. They can provide counsel on broader scientific, medical, and public health topics as well. Before my time at FDA, I thoroughly enjoyed the opportunity to serve as a special government employee, or SGE, on the FDA Cardiorenal Advisory Panel, the FDA Science Board Subcommittee on Science and Technology, along with some ad hoc SGE work with some of CDRH's device advisory committees. Advisory committee meetings provide a unique window into the FDA's work and into associated issues and use of technology and critical areas of medicine and health. And they can play a particularly important role in uncharted areas of public health. For example, during the COVID public health emergency, the Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee provided valuable external advice that FDA carefully considered when making decisions about authorization of the COVID vaccines that played such a key role in countering the pandemic. Our advisory committees play an important role in opening up the process and increasing transparency and ensuring that the FDA hears from external voices, free to agree or disagree with FDA reviewers and leaders as we make decisions and policies. We recognize that most people have a lot of things to think about other than the details of FDA advisory committees, but I remain hopeful that we can improve the understanding that advisory committees don't make the decisions. Rather, our full-time civil servants make the decisions as specified by law. I also hope that disagreements in interpretation between our staff and advisors should not always be regarded as a negative. If we always agreed, we wouldn't need advice. While advisory committees are just that, advisory, many of you have heard me speak before about how important advisory committees are to the FDA's work. The agency has frequently reconsidered ways to optimize our use of advisory committees, and I've been pleased to work with Dr. Bumpus on these efforts since she joined the agency. Our efforts out of the Commissioner's Office have focused on finding ways to modernize and improve our systems and to enhance the experience of special government employees who serve the public as members. While this infrastructure effort does not have the glitz of medical product decisions, a lot has been accomplished already in our systems, internal education, and attention to the needs of the SGEs who are so important to us. A measure of our success will be if SGEs spend less time on paperwork and more time digesting the complicated science, public health, and medical issues. As we work on process improvement, we wanted to be sure to give a forum to hear from the public about your experiences and ideas about advisory committees. We're eager to hear from you today about these issues. As a physician, I know the best care that leads to the best outcomes for patients is that which is grounded in solid scientific data, research, and expertise. This approach is equally applicable to FDA-regulated products and public health issues at large. For this reason, it's equally important that FDA's advisory committees involve a diversity of membership and experiences to better understand the needs of our broad population. There's an important related issue concerning the key role the FDA plays in communicating health information to the public. I've been vocal about my concern that misinformation is a top threat to public health in America because of how it undermines not only the trust that the public has in the FDA, but in science itself. Addressing this issue goes beyond simply publishing accurate information. It involves clear, consistent communication, sound science, and sound policy, as well as open dialogue involving the FDA, experts in topic areas we're addressing, and the broader public. In fact, one of the most difficult areas that we need to address is how to have disagreements that are vital to the process of science without undermining the public's confidence and trust in science. An advisory committee is a place where voices and opinions should be aired, not necessarily reaching complete consensus all the time, but giving a place for disagreements to be better understood. Environments that open the dialogue and allow a broad array of people to witness examination of the data and the evidence underlying our decisions and the consideration of experts provide an avenue to build public trust and confidence in decisions. An important element of this discourse is this discussion of uncertainties as study designs, interpretation of the needs of consumers and patients, and data analyses are dissected in the course of advisory committee discussions. FDA's advisory committees include committee members from a wide variety of backgrounds, often including patient or consumer representatives, whose role is to provide a voice for those most impacted by our decisions. The public can also submit comments through the public docket or by speaking at the open public hearing portion of advisory committee meetings. As our advances in science and technology continue to expand and the opportunities for new treatments and approaches grows, it's increasingly important for the public to be aware of and understand the work of the advisory committees and how that work is factored into FDA's decision-making. This will enhance the understanding of emerging products and issues that affect them, demonstrate that it's valuable to voice concerns, recommendations, and feedback, and we hope, as we move along, increase trust in the process. I'm eager to hear your suggestions for the composition of our advisory committees, how we can improve the public's understanding of advisory committees, and overall, how we can optimize the advisory committee process. It's my hope that with your input, we can make our advisory committees stronger than ever. Thanks for your participation. And at this point, I'm pleased to turn the microphone over to our Principal Deputy Commissioner, Namandje Bumpus, for additional remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Califf, for that insight on the importance of advisory committees, and thank you all for joining us today. As Dr. Califf said, the FDA relies on advisory committees composed of outside experts who evaluate data to provide advice on scientific, technical, and policy questions, and share their perspectives on patient and consumer experience issues to help the FDA make decisions based on the best science available. The FDA has 32 advisory committees, one of which has 18 panels and 2 subcommittees that cover the full range of products and public health issues that fall under the FDA's regulatory authority. The types of advice that FDA asks of individual advisory committees can vary. For example, FDA might ask for an advisory committee to provide feedback on the nuances of data interpretation, the clinical importance of possible benefits, risks, or toxicities of interventions, or product safety and effectiveness. The topics FDA takes to advisory committees are often intricate. The committee's consideration might include assessment of multiple correlated outcomes, such as the relationship between clinical applications and product development, or ethical considerations and emergency use. Because of the complex nature of their work, it is important that advisory committees are composed of the right experts for the topic, and that administrative burdens for the special government employees, or SGEs, are addressed to the extent possible. Over time, we have received a lot of feedback on our advisory committee process, from their composition to their role in advising FDA. And because of this, we've made it a priority to evaluate our advisory committee process and to explore ways to optimize their use. While the agency regularly receives input about advisory committees from some specific groups, we would like to hear more broadly from all parties interested in the advisory committee process and how it can inform FDA's decisions. As part of this ongoing effort, we have convened this listening session to hear directly from you all on the composition, public perception, and overall experience of advisory committees and their members. I'm delighted that we have over 50 speakers sharing their perspectives today, and I'm confident that this dialogue will provide an important and a useful step forward in our continuing effort to optimize our advisory committee process. And now I'm pleased to turn things back over to Dale Crescenzio.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bumpus. We are now going to start the open public comment segment for topic 1, composition of advisory committees. If you're interested in reading the questions the FDA developed for each of these topics today, please refer to docket number FDA-202-N-1809 on regulations.gov at www.regulations.gov or our meetings webpage at www.sda.gov. As a reminder, we have a full agenda today with over 50 speakers. If you have not concluded your remarks in the allotted 5 minutes, I apologize in advance, but I will interrupt you and ask you to stop. And please remember that your comments and presentations today will be included in the public docket. If you run out of time and don't get to complete your remarks, please submit them to the public docket for consideration. Next slide, please. And one more slide, please. There we go. Okay, with that, let's begin with our first presenter for topic 1, composition of advisory committees. And I just want to check quickly, I did hear that our first presenter, Sven George, was not available, but I just thought I would give him 1 second to make sure that he is not here before we move on. Okay. All right, I'm going to move quickly to our second presenter, Mara Burr.
Thank you and good morning. My name is Mara Burr, and I am the Vice President for Regulatory and Technical Affairs at Consumer Brands Association. I want to thank FDA for hosting this listening session on optimizing the uses of and the processes for advisory committees. The Consumer Brands Association, or Consumer Brands, champions the industry whose products Americans depend on every day, representing nearly 2,000 iconic brands. From household and personal care products to food and beverage products, the consumer packaged good industry plays a vital role empowering the U.S. economy, contributing $2 trillion to the U.S. GDP and supporting more than 20 million jobs. Consumer Brands is committed to working closely with FDA in partnership to address the ever-evolving issues associated with food safety and innovation. Several years ago, I participated on the Trade and Environment Policy Advisory Committee, or TPAC, jointly chaired by the Office of the United States Trade Representative and the Environmental Protection Agency, to advise on issues in the intersection of trade and environment. Through my experience on TPAC, I found that advisory committees work best when they are balanced and inclusive. Although TPAC representatives often had different views and ideologies, when they would come together and agree on issues or positions, it was remarkable and powerful. With respect to the foods program, FDA is in the midst of implementing its largest reorganization in its history, with over 8,000 employees impacted by the establishment of the Human Foods Program under a new Deputy Commissioner for Foods. Not only must FDA navigate a complex reorganization, but also must address food safety issues, including preventing heavy metals from impacting the most vulnerable in society, addressing nutrition and healthy diets, as well as state-level actions undermining the authority of FDA, and at a time when dealing with declining budgets. We're also starting to get to a new normal after navigating the COVID-19 pandemic and enduring the societal and health changes that it brought about. Advisory committee members should be chosen based on their specific expertise needed by FDA and should serve in their individual capacity to avoid unnecessary conflicts. As FDA constitutes its advisory committees, it should work to ensure that committee members disclose information necessary for FDA to prevent against conflict of interest and unwanted biases in the process of providing information on scientific or technical issues. I recommend that FDA look to balance its advisory committees so that it receives advice from industry, academics, scientists, and stakeholders, and other individuals who are well positioned through experience and education, as well as an understanding of government, to provide input on policy and technical issues. FDA should closely examine its current group of advisory committees and determine whether to revise the current charters to allow for better alignment on the priority issues of the agency and for the increased need to understand and adapt to rapidly changing innovation in areas of FDA jurisdiction. And this is specifically with respect to the reorganization of the Human Food Program. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Mara. Our next speaker is Joshua Habreski. Giving one more moment to see if we can locate Joshua before we move to the next speaker. Okay, let's move to our next speaker, Suzanne Robati. Suzanne?
Hi, my name is Suzanne Robati, and I am a consumer representative on the Drug Safety and Risk Management Advisory Committee. The FDA states that advisory committees need to be comprised of external advisors in order to support the FDA's mission of protecting and promoting public health by providing the FDA with independent advice. And the 4 types of members on these committees help do that. The consumer reps are affiliated with consumer-based and consumer organizations. They are generalists, not focused on specific disease therapy, and they have less in-depth knowledge of medical issues. And this is a definition by the FDA. The scientific members, which make up the majority of the committees, are scientific or medical experts with expertise in a general topic, etc. The other 2 members, patient reps and industry reps, do not have a vote. These are very different responsibilities, and each advisory committee is required to have a consumer rep. But I have often sat on meetings that were joint meetings where I was the only consumer rep. A combined 2 committee meeting deserves 2 consumer reps. Next, consumer rep seats are too often filled by people with medical ties and backgrounds. Again, there's a seat for medical ties and medical background, and that is a scientific member. Under the Human Drugs, Biologics, Tobacco, and Pediatrics committees, the FDA lists 21 committees with rosters. Of these 21 committees, 9 of the consumer rep positions are presently vacant, while one of them has at least 2 industry reps. One of the consumer reps is a vice president of research at a nonprofit whose budget is packed with corporate sponsors: Janssen, Genentech, Novartis, Regeneron. Another is a founder of a nonprofit that partners with researchers. Another is deeply involved with a national nonprofit whose financial sponsors include Bristol Myers, Squibb, Amgen, Novartis, AbbVie, and more. One is an MD, a professor and director of hospital of a division. And then there's a consumer rep who has a master's in nursing, a PhD in epidemiology, was a director of Merck for 15 years, and is presently a consultant for pharmaceutical companies. Another person worked with the CDC for 10 years. All of these people might be excellent committee members. They probably are. I don't know them, but their resumes are filled with pharmaceutical ties and conflicts of interest, both intellectual and financial. I would argue the FDA is not fulfilling its obligation to have consumer representation on the committee, and is doing a disservice to the committee when a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a PharmD, a person who is paid directly or indirectly by pharmaceutical companies, or ex-employee of a medical company or government organization takes a consumer representative seat. The whole point of a consumer rep is an independent point of view, not one that has been trained to think along standard medical processes, as important as they are, or one that is partnering with a pharmaceutical company. And by the way, where have the patient reps gone? They used to be listed on the roster as recently as last year, but I went through the rosters last night and I only saw 1 patient rep listed. What's going on here? The concept of patient reps was also to have a different point of view. Patient reps don't have a vote, but they should be part of the discussion. 3, public testimony has a primary flaw. There is no requirement to discuss conflicts of interest, either financial or intellectual. In fact, there's motivation to hide it. The FDA has published guidelines that include a statement that the chair of the committee reads before the public testimony starts. The statement welcomes the public and states if you have any financial interest relevant to the meeting, the FDA encourages you to state the interest as you begin. Such interest may include a company's or group's payment of your travel or other expenses, or grant money that your organization receives from the sponsor or competitor. If you do not have any such interest, you may wish to state that for the record. If you prefer not to address the financial interest, you can still give your comments. The guidelines go on to say that, and the chair has to read this out loud, neither the chair nor any committee member should further question the person regarding any potential financial relationships. That, to me, is insane. The whole point of holding the advisory committee is that the members of the advisory committee be independent of financial and other conflict of interest, but the public speakers can run rampant over that guideline. Many of the clinicians standing at the public speaker podium will state they were not paid for their time or travel for the testimony. Then they reveal they're part of the trial. They have patients in the trial. That's good. They reveal every patient always benefits, and the improvements are always life-changing. Patient advocacy group leaders will also state they have no conflict of interest, no payments from the sponsor, or they may just not address the issue. But so many times the funding for their organization comes from pharma and they get paid by the organization. It's not hard to figure this out. These people are registered ahead of time, and it takes an hour, maybe two, to double check that these people do not have a conflict of interest. There should be an attestation made by a public speaker when they sign up, or a declaration of what their conflict of interests are. Thank you very much. Yep, thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Sophia Phillips.
Hello, my name is Sophia Phillips, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Patient, Consumer, and Public Health Coalition. We are an informal coalition of organizations representing the interests of patients, consumers, healthcare professionals, scientists, public health experts, and advocates. We wish to express our comments regarding topic 1, the composition of advisory committees. To begin, we have concerns with the patients, health professionals, and industry-affiliated individuals who are often miscategorized as consumer representatives on FDA advisory committees, as they do not represent consumers' priorities or perspectives. According to the FDA, candidates for this position are intended to meet the following criteria: 1, the ability to analyze scientific data and critique research design, and 2, an affiliation with active participation in independent consumer or community-based organizations, or a history of advocating for the public interest. Unfortunately, very few consumer representatives meet these standards. Many lack the ability to analyze scientific data and critique research design, and many candidates selected would better fill the position of a patient rep or industry rep, as they possess strong ties to industry or the very products they are reviewing. The current standards for conflicts of interest are inadequate, and as written can have significant implications on meeting outcomes. As an example, earlier this year, the FDA convened an advisory committee meeting to assess a cardiac device made by Abbott, but they did not disclose that most committee members had received payments from the company or conducted research funded by Abbott. Yet this information was readily available in in a federal database. We urge the FDA to review more closely all appointments, establish clear and consistently applied guidelines regarding conflicts of interest, and provide appropriate training to appointees that highlights the public health mission of the FDA and the scientific standards required by law. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. Our next speaker is Douglas Keller.
Thank you. My name is Douglas Keller. I'm speaking as a private citizen today, not associated with any commercial or nonprofit entity. I'm familiar with advisory committee meetings in Cedar, having participated several times as part of a sponsor's application, and recently as a patient in the public comments portion of a meeting. My remarks today center on the inconsistency within the agency in the makeup of advisory committees. This inconsistency relates to the choice of members and the size of the committees. The advisory committee meeting I attended in March as a patient was considering therapies for multiple myeloma, a hematologic malignancy. In addition to the patient and consumer representatives, this advisory committee consisted of 7 standing voting members, 5 of whom were experts in solid tumors, 1 in lymphoma and 1 in hematology. Temporary members included a statistician and 1 multiple myeloma specialist. While all of these members were outstanding physicians and scientists, only 3 of these 9 had a detailed knowledge of the disease to be treated, and only 1 was a specialist. This led to a meeting that spent time educating the committee on the disease and the treatment more so than should have been necessary, led to some questions that were a bit off target, and, in my opinion, led to a decision that placed undue reliance on statistics because that is a common language for clinical trial investigators. Overall, while I think the recommendation made was appropriate, it was an inefficient meeting. While this committee makeup seems to be typical for the ODAC, some other CDER divisions have a different approach. A recent pulmonary and allergy advisory committee meeting roster was almost exclusively made up of experts in the topic being discussed. Other centers take different approaches, but again, there's a lack of consistency. A recent cell tissue and gene therapy advisory committee meeting had 7 temporary members, which ensured that there were enough experts on the topic. A molecular and clinical genetics device panel had more temporary experts than standing members for a recent meeting. In contrast, a recent vaccines and related biological products advisory committee meeting was largely made up of non-experts in the discussion topic. The FDA website states that the FDA uses committees and panels to obtain independent expert advice on scientific, technical, and policy matters. My observation is that the expert in that statement is sometimes lacking. Size is another variable in advisory committees. I've seen as many as 13 members and as few as 5. How many experts does it take to give sound scientific decisions? Is there a reason why there's so much variability in these committees? While FDA is the final decision maker on approval, the advisory committees should play a role in influencing the decision. By not having a sufficient number of experts on a topic involved in the meeting, the committee loses its ability to exert a well-reasoned scientific influence on the FDA decision. There can be a useful role for having some non-experts on a committee or panel, but the experts should outnumber the non-experts. I will acknowledge that the solution is not easy. The first challenge is to find enough experts who are not involved in the studies being discussed. The second challenge is to find experts not involved in the studies who have no conflicts of interest. In today's world, this seems an insurmountable challenge. FDA has obtained waivers to allow some experts with perceived conflicts of interest to serve as temporary members of advisory committees and panels. In order to meet the challenges of staffing advisory committees appropriately, the use of these waivers will have to increase. This brings up the third challenge, which is an increased workload for FDA. Despite these challenges, I believe the effort is worthwhile. FDA is in the business of assessing benefit versus risk. Is the risk of not getting the right level of advice worth the benefit of continuing current conflict of interest policies and less work? Conversely, is the benefit of getting scientifically sound advice worth the extra effort and the potential perception of conflicts of interest? I don't have a perfect solution to offer, but I feel paramount importance is to get the best advice you can, even if some stakeholders may not like your methods. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Douglas. Our next speaker is Laura Lytle.
Hi, yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Laura Lytle. You're very close. I'm the Health Policy Director for the National Center for Health Research, a nonprofit think tank that conducts, analyzes, and scrutinizes research on a range of health issues with a particular focus on prevention strategies, treatments, and products most effective for patients and consumers. We do not accept funding from companies to make products that are subject of our work, so we have no conflict of interest. I'm grateful today for the time to provide insights on the composition of FDA advisory committees. It's crucial to ensure that these committees are comprised of individuals who can provide objective, science-based recommendations. Here are our key suggestions. Number one, consumer representatives. Some consumer representatives lack the necessary scientific expertise to effectively analyze data and critique research design. Additionally, many have affiliations with industries or products under reviews, which leads to conflicts of interest. It's essential to ensure that consumer representatives truly represent consumer perspective and possess the required scientific competence. Consumer representatives should represent the consumer perspective, but many selected would be in a better position of patient or industry representative because they lack the necessary ability to analyze the scientific data. Critique research design, and many have strong ties to industry or products they are reviewing. This leads to a conflict of interest or the inability to appropriately, scientifically, and neutrally make recommendations. Number two, financial conflicts of interest. The current FDA policy on conflicts of interest is too narrow, allowing individuals with prior financial ties to industry or current financial ties to the industry they're reviewing to serve on advisory committees. Transparent disclosure of all financial ties to companies under review is crucial to maintaining objectivity and trust in the FDA. We hope that the FDA will provide clear guidelines on conflicts of interest, selecting representatives with appropriate scientific expertise, provide training on statistical analysis, and requiring disclosure of all financial ties are all valuable steps towards enhancing the integrity of FDA advisory committee appointments. I thank you for your dedication to this important issue and for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. Our next speaker, Jean Publi, I believe is not present, but I thought I would just give a moment to see if you can raise your hand so our technical team can find you in case your name is not listed on your profile. Okay, we will move on from Jean. Our next speaker is Sunil Kadam.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to comment at today's public forum for optimizing the use of and process for advisory committees. I'm Sunil Kadam, Chief Regulatory Officer at Apollo Therapeutics. My comments represent my opinion and not necessarily those of my employer. The composition and process of advisory committee deliberations includes representation from FDA, sponsor, independent external panel members, and importantly, the facts and empirical data analyzed from clinical studies. Data is like the dark matter that binds this process. It is ever present. Effective review of this available clinical information and the translation of the safety and efficacy findings to guide the course of clinical practice and patient care should be critical in seeking advisory committee input. Doing this in an open forum, when appropriate, has the potential to improve public health and raise awareness of FDA and sponsors' rigorous scientific discourse prior to approval of medicine. This is a good thing and demonstrates application of scientific methods for decision-making in a public forum. As a sponsor member in leading a recently held FDA advisory committee, I am honored to contribute at this public listening session. Despite the trend for larger clinical trials, statistically powered for clinically meaningful endpoints, the safety and efficacy of a drug is often evaluated in a fraction of the population that may eventually use the approved medicine. Although decisions made by FDA staff uphold the highest standards of technical, scientific, and clinical review within the regulatory framework, small sample data sets, for various reasons, often limits a reliable assessment of benefit risk. Adding an external panel and their viewpoint to limited data is bound to invoke bias and the potential for external influence. Making critical decisions then, without robust data, has the potential to create a negative perception of an otherwise independent subcommittee process. So what can we do? To better evaluate clinical benefit and inform patients, FDA could reserve the option of convening a pre-approval advisory committee for any drug at a reasonable time, 12 to 18 months after initial approval, that was based on the agency's assessment of benefit risk. The additional real-world experience would then allow for a clearer picture of the extent and durability of that clinical benefit and safety risks in a broader patient population, several times more than the patients exposed in sponsors' pivotal trials. The outcome of a post-approval advisory committee process could then significantly improve the product label and guide best practice with real-world learnings across diverse populations to greatly inform clinical utility. The advisory committee process then becomes a test of the effective use of a medicine and an informed choice for patients, rather than the test for approval or denial of a potentially ineffective treatment for release in a broader setting with limited clinical data in hand. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Sunil. Our next presenter is Michelle Lorenz. And Michelle is the first presenter of today's session who will be presenting with slides. Michelle, as a reminder, our technical team will advance your slides for you. Please just say next slide when you need the slide advanced.
Thank you. Today, my presentation is focused on AdComs in terminal heterogeneous rare diseases, with examples from AdComs in Duchenne, ALS, and amyloidosis, the disease that killed my mom. Next slide. When trial endpoints in rare diseases are based on subjective bounded scales, contrary to objective data like a tumor shrinking, experts must educate AdCom members about the COAs before they can properly assess efficacy. Next slide. These are COAs used in ALS and Duchenne. While both are validated and associated with disease progression, they also have weaknesses in accurately assessing all the changes in how people feel, function, and survive. Next slide. Bounded scales are not infallible scales. These studies about the ALS-FRSR scale conclude that there are flaws in the linearity, multidimensionality, and they are invalid ordinal scales. Plus, they can, quote, mislead clinicians and have negative consequences for ALS trials. Next slide. Here you see similar reviews. In fact, the Critical Path Institute and NIH's ARC program currently have projects to discuss new COAs in rare diseases. Next slide. We can't acknowledge flaws on the research side and ignore them on the drug approval side. Flawed COAs lead to flawed data, and flawed data led to failed endpoints in several important trials, despite drugs providing clinically meaningful benefits to some people. In 100% fatal diseases, dying patients can't wait years for another trial or decades for new COAs. For them, time is muscle, motor neurons, paralysis, and death. Next slide. Because of all of this, rare disease AdCom members must be informed about the need for regulatory flexibility and modified risk benefit in diseases with critical unmet needs. Next slide. There must be a full and fair discussion about the opinions and observations of the PIs, clinicians, and researchers specializing in those rare diseases. Next slide. AdCom members must be advised about the difficulties meeting statistical significance in small trials with heterogeneous populations, and just as Dr. Woodcock used to warn, the risk of lethal type 2 errors in fatal rare diseases. Next slide. For example, biostatisticians should be given ample time to speak about the statistical methodology more appropriate for heterogeneous rare disease trials. Next slide. Biomarker experts like Bob Bowser should be given ample time to discuss and explain newly discovered, unvalidated biomarkers, the first objective data in many of these rare diseases that may predict a clinically meaningful benefit. In a recent AdCom, the biostatistician and biomarker expert spoke for 9 minutes each. 9 minutes for a drug in development for 17 years in a disease that kills 6,000 Americans a year. Next slide. In rare diseases, top researchers and clinicians are often the trial's own PIs, people like Bob Brown and Jerry Mendell with 40 and 50 years of disease expertise. These are world-renowned experts, the people to whom you would take your parent or child. Their clinical observations should matter. Next slide. And as you can see on this screen and the next, PIs and treating physicians with decades of experience in Duchenne, ALS, and amyloidosis said things like, they've never seen improvement or stabilization in function as they did in these trials, and their patients had changes that were profoundly clinically meaningful. And yet there was no discussion about the discrepancy between the failed endpoints and these expert clinical observations. Please go 2 slides forward. For due process, that's 3 slides, one more slide. We need more time, that's obvious, likely 2 days. Next slide, please. The sponsor has the burden of proof and thus needs to go first and last in the AdCom with time to rebut the FDA's assertions. We need a regulatory lawyer from the FDA to act as an arbiter of what discussions are relevant and not prejudicial. Next slide. This table compares the instructions and voting questions among different AdComs, but as you can see, there was no consistency across the divisions or even in the same disease. Next slide. This exemplifies why we need something like standard instructions and verdict forms across the FDA. We need one-page documents summarizing the standards, the burden of proof, and approval pathways on the public docket. We need a one-page rare disease outlining the guidance issues in rare diseases. And here we need AdCom members need a disease-specific one-pager so they don't reach blatantly wrong conclusions like it's mere chance that people with ALS will regain function. Please skip 2 slides. Just as PIs know the data best, patients know their bodies best, only a patient knows what it feels like to die each day, and they know when a drug helps them live. Their documented patient experiences, clinical records, and videos proving functional changes must be valued as, quote, supporting evidence of efficacy. Next slide. Patient reps should have qualifications like those you see on the screen that were demonstrated by Buddy Cassidy and Duchenne. Next slide. In presumptive service-related diseases like ALS, where our most decorated officers have up to a 10x risk, it's our moral obligation to give veterans a voice as a second patient rep. Next slide. Likewise, we encourage the FDA to include physicians who have rare disease as AdCom members, even if they have to be temporary non-voting members. And then finally, I see I'm close to running out of time, and I'll finish up with the next slides on diversity. Next slide. So what we know is we need somebody with OMH to oversee the diversity discussions and compliance with the drug sponsors in every single AdCom. It's been discussed in none that I've participated in. Next slide. 2 slides. Illustrating this need, I compared 15 ALS and amyloidosis trials. There's 3.5% Black trial participation, despite 12% in our general population, 6% Hispanic participation, despite 19%. And then go to the last 2 slides. Both ATTR and ELECT2 amyloidosis disproportionately impact Black and Mexican Americans. Yet when you compare the areas of highest density population of underrepresented minority communities, you see almost no centers of excellence and even less clinical trials. Next slide. Drug sponsors must be required to map the locations of their trial sites, and OMH should discuss how those impacted the trial efforts. And Dr. Califf, Dr. Marks, and Dr. Cavazzoni, I would love to see a separate listening session discussing issues of diversity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Our next presenter is Natalie Tolley, who is also presenting with slides.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Natalie Tolley, and I'm AbbVie's Vice President of Regulatory Intercontinental and Regulatory Policy and Intelligence. AbbVie is a global research-based biopharmaceutical company, and our mission is to discover and deliver innovative medicines that solve serious health issues. Next slide. Today, I will discuss the categories of expertise and perspectives essential for advisory committees and how we can enhance inclusion of diverse viewpoints, especially patient voices. Next slide. To ensure a variety of diverse perspectives and experiences are incorporated into advisory committee meetings, FDA can implement several strategies. Firstly, collaborating with professional societies, academic institutions, and advocacy groups can help recruit diverse qualified candidates. Implementing a standard, transparent selection process will enhance trust and ensure the most qualified individuals are chosen. Secondly, regular training and updates for committee members should be provided to ensure they understand the regulatory framework, terminology, and authority of FDA. Committee members should have a clear understanding of their roles so as not to provide advice on approval or non-approval, but to provide expert scientific advice. Thirdly, FDA appoints additional advisors on an ad hoc basis to bring expertise to specific situations. Temporary members are usually appointed as special government employees and are subject to conflict of interest statutes and regulations. AbbVie supports continued collaboration with external experts and organizations to bring insights and knowledge into the committee's deliberations. Fourthly, while FDA's conflict of interest rules are essential for maintaining integrity of committee processes, they can often result in disqualification of thought-leading scientists, physicians, and other medical experts. FDA should ensure that its conflict of interest and disclosure policies consider the reality that many experts have working relationships with industry and recognize that not all relationships should require disqualification. By simplifying the process, enhancing support, leveraging technology, and revisiting waiver policies, FDA can reduce the burden on members while still ensuring conflicts are managed. Fifthly, we recommend that FDA establish feedback mechanisms for committee members and stakeholders to share experiences and suggest improvements. It will be helpful for FDA to review and incorporate this feedback to enhance effectiveness and efficiency of future meetings. Next slide. Patient representatives provide important perspectives on how a disease or condition and its current treatments affect them. Their input is vital for ensuring that decisions consider real-world impact on health outcomes and quality of life. Continued provision of pre-meeting briefings and educational resources ensures these individuals are well prepared to contribute meaningfully to discussions. AbbVie supports patient representatives being selected on a meeting-by-meeting basis. Additionally, FDA should consider standing agenda items with respect to objective and subjective patient data relevant to the topic of discussion. This would require including not only clinical experts, but also experts such as social scientists, behavioral scientists, health outcome scientists, and others to provide insight into social determinants of health that shape patient behavior and outcomes. Next slide. It is essential for both FDA and industry to prepare their own background packages for meetings to provide critical information and context for discussions. Having separate packages allows for a balanced and thorough evaluation, ensuring that all relevant information is considered. This approach promotes transparency, objectivity, and robust discussion. While the structure of FDA advisory committees aims to facilitate comprehensive and balanced discussion, the inherent diversity of interests and perspective can sometimes lead to spirited debates. The role of the chair as moderator should provide sponsors with adequate time to respond to feedback during committee meetings. This ensures all questions and concerns raised by the members are addressed comprehensively, leading to more informed decision-making. And finally, through clear and straightforward questions to the committee, voting provides transparency in the decision-making process. It allows the public, stakeholders, and FDA officials to understand committee members' positions on specific issues. This transparency builds trust and confidence in FDA's decisions. It ensures they take a clear stance on safety, efficacy, and other relevant aspects of the product under review by considering diverse perspectives. This accountability ensures decisions are made based on scientific evidence and expert judgment. In conclusion, AbbVie appreciates FDA's efforts to seek stakeholder input, and we would especially like to thank FDA for the opportunity to have direct dialogue today. We look forward to continuing to work with FDA as the agency considers reforms to the committee's compositions and procedures. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Our next presenter, Carly Booth, and Carly will also be presenting with slides.
Hi, next slide, please. Hi, I'm Carly Harrington, formerly Carly Bowes, Executive Director of CLL Society, where we serve tens of thousands of chronic lymphocytic leukemia patients and their families and caregivers in partnership with the CLL medical community. 2 slides forward, please. My goal with this slide is not to make you experts in CLL today, but to give you some context for our recent experience with ODACs. It was made clear to us at the last ODAC with which we were involved that although people think they understand CLL, some context and critical components of the patient experience were further needed for reviewers at the FDA. We have by no means solved CLL. We have treatments, but they break down into 2 classes, and generally you can take one from each class before running out of options. CLL is a chronic condition. We need to keep options on the table, even if they have side effects, so long as they can be managed, as is true with so much in oncology. We also need to keep the pipeline for future options robust, which means reviewers need to understand CLL better if they are to engage companies coming forward with new innovations. Next slide, please. So I'd like to refer to a specific ODAC in which we were involved to illustrate how things can be improved. This was a 2022 ODAC regarding a specific PI3K drug based on toxicity concerns. In this ODAC, discussion kept coming back to the fact that we had so many other drugs to choose from now, the so-called changing landscape in CLL. But as I just said, all of the new approved drugs were within a single class, and patients can take only one drug per class. So the drug under consideration was the third option for patients for whom the other treatments had failed, and the only option other than a clinical trial, which isn't available to everyone. The choice wasn't between this drug and other approved drugs. It was between this imperfect drug and succumbing to their CLL. Our community doesn't want toxic understudied treatment options any more than the FDA does. Our goals are the same, but there are nuances that need to be understood. We at CLL Society tried to raise awareness of these issues, but our letters and our requests went unanswered. In the intro, Dr. Califf discussed the importance of public trust and how misinformation can negatively impact that trust. This is an example of that, as our community was reading articles like the one on the slide above and feeling frustrated and worried the FDA was making decisions on an issue it didn't fully understand. Next slide, please. The other very critical part of all this is that CLL patients need to keep the pipeline of innovation in our cancer as robust as possible. Remember that we are living a long time with CLL, and it is common for patients to run out of options. That ODAC clearly signaled to innovators that FDA had not surrounded themselves with true experts on a committee that understood or appreciated the nuances of balancing the need for options with toxicity. The BTK inhibitor class evolved over time so that it now includes options that have greater tolerability. And we expected the same to happen in the PI3K class. But R&D in that class for CLL was pretty much shut down with the FDA post-approval action for this drug. Next slide, please. We respectfully request that patients representing the actual condition for which an application is pending be consulted before an advisory committee meeting. The FDA share its concerns just as it does with the committee members and give patient groups a chance to share their insights. And when patients are included, they should first look to patient groups like ours who can represent a broad cross-section of patient needs, rather than randomly selecting an individual patient spokesperson with a single point of view who hasn't necessarily made it their business to know the spectrum of issues patients face. Next slide, please. We also can't stress enough the need to bring true experts, treating clinicians, to the committee membership. When it's a rare disease, every clinician seems conflicted, but there are ways to mitigate this outside of immediate disqualification of these experts. And there was a strong effort in the last PDUFA cycle to give FDA statutory flexibility. FDA shut it down, saying it would delay reviews and approvals. Well, as patients, we are willing to take a delay for something as important to us as getting this right. Next slide, please. We want you to hear that these are very important topics that mean a lot to us. We appreciate today's conversation and hope that it is just a conversation, but the start of a meaningful engagement. We sincerely hope that you will follow up with those of us speaking today as we stand ready to work with you on changes that are important to patients and important to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carly. Our next presenter is Caroline Renko, who will also present the slides.
Good morning. My name is Caroline Renko, and I represent PharmDow at Georgetown University. I have no conflicts of interest. As we have heard today, FDA advisory committees have been a vital, important part of the drug approval process since they began in the 1960s. The more recent inclusion of patient representatives or consumer advocates in advisory committees is also laudable. But there should be some coherence to the way FDA includes public representatives, and these representatives or caregivers should be held to a similar standard of scrutiny as the scientific members of the committees. Patient or consumer representatives should have to demonstrate that they have a public interest perspective. It is not enough for a patient or caregiver to represent only themselves and their family. If there is no evidence from the public record that an individual consumer, patient, or caregiver has done anything for the population they represent, they should not be on the committee. For all committee positions, candidates without conflicts of interest should be favored. In any case, conflicts of interest rules should apply to both the individual and the organization they represent. Representatives who do not disclose their conflicts of interest should be removed from their position. Now let's turn to open public hearings. Next slide. Public testimony has an impact. Unfortunately, industry and industry-friendly and industry-friendly groups pack the public hearings with highly selected and sometimes highly coached patients and caregivers who then provide testimony that always back the product being considered. An industry publication by 3D Communications advises sponsors to, quote, develop an advisory committee strategy that incorporates a plan to familiarize all stakeholders with the opportunities to participate in an advisory committee meeting. Making all stakeholders aware of the pending meeting can have an important impact on the committee's deliberations, end quote. However, only industry-funded stakeholders are notified. For example, at the recent donanemab meeting just this past week, at least 6 speakers were clinical trial participants or relatives, all who supported the drug. No one who developed severe brain bleeding or swelling, no relatives of the 3 clinical trial participants who died from the drug-related complications spoke at the meeting. It would not have been good business sense for the sponsors to have invited them. And while a pharmaceutical company may not coach patients itself, that role can be played by an industry-friendly advocacy group. IMALS is a good example. Prior to several advisory committees to evaluate ineffective ALS therapies, IMALS provided their supporters with talking points, including exact verbiage. The IMALS guide to submitting written testimony to the FDA about Neuron told constituents that, quote, repeating key phrases across comments might help AdCom committee members remember important facts as they make their recommendation. Here are some phrases that we suggest you use. Please consider the totality of evidence. Please continue the FDA's pattern of regulatory flexibility of ALS therapies so more people can live longer with ALS as we work towards a cure, end quote. And there were many more. Next slide. When groups that act as an industry mouthpiece are involved, the message will always be in favor of the sponsor's product. Industry contributions to advocacy groups are smart investing, not philanthropy. The FDA should require sponsors, a group that inform clinical trial participants about an FDA meeting, to inform all clinical trial participants, including those who had complications, dropouts, and the relatives of those who died. The FDA has a duty to ensure that unconflicted groups and individuals are heard at open public hearings. Fostering diversity is not a passive process. Industry-backed advocacy groups have abundant resources to recruit patients and caregivers to give testimony. Unconflicted groups are drowned out at every open public hearing. Conflicts of interest for those who speak in open public hearings should be disclosed before people testify and should include personal financial disclosures, employment, board membership, consulting, other compensation, expenses from the sponsors, or any organization funded by or connected to the sponsor. Next slide. In conclusion, opinions rendered by industry-funded groups and individuals who have been recruited and coached by industry-funded groups are not representative of affected populations and will always tilt towards the sponsor side. The playing field should be leveled for advocates so that more reliable views of independent organizations and independent consumers can be heard far above the industry-generated din. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Caroline. Our next speaker is Kara Barassi, who will be presenting also with slides.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Good morning. I'm Kara Barassi, CEO of Haystack Project. Blaze is my son who has a rare disease and the reason I'm here today. Caregivers, along with doctors, researchers, drug companies, CMS, and Congress, continue working to make a difference every day and everywhere that can impact patients and their families, and this must include the FDA. Next slide. Haystack Project is a nonprofit umbrella organization of some 150 ultra-rare patient groups. Several years ago, we started an effort to make incremental, credible, bipartisan improvements at the FDA for rare diseases. We didn't advocate for a center of excellence, but took the time to hear the agency and found what we thought was a productive path forward. The effort culminated in what we felt and what a bipartisan group of congressional offices repeatedly told us was a thoughtful and responsible proposal called the HEART Act. Next slide. One of the provisions called for giving FDA the ability to add true experts, clinicians on the front lines, on their expert committees. This was born out of repeated experiences with FDA having a lack of understanding of rare diseases. We need the FDA to understand that an informed decision requires specific information from experts and from patients who can voice their lived experiences. We were told repeatedly that a general geneticist would fit that bill. But the FDA must recognize this is not appropriate and that the conflict of interest rules must be changed. The HART Act proposed disclosing the conflict so that fellow committee members could account for them as they sifted through information. Haystack even offered for the conflicted expert to be a non-voting member of the committee, among other suggestions. But the HART Act was met with FDA opposition.
All right, hallelujah. We got good news.
Was provided. Next slide, please. Again, this proposal was not rooted in an N of 1 experience, so I'll share a few with you now. The AdCom meeting on
Fantastic. Thanks for calling. That's a great review.
Of pancreatitis and thrombocytopenia, but there was nothing to balance. One was happening every day, upending patients' lives with constant pain, hospitalizations, and sometimes leaving them at a new baseline of disability they would never come back from. The other was a theoretical risk that treating clinicians made very clear could be managed, much like the side effects of chemotherapy. It also happened to be the first ever treatment for FCS and the largest trial of FCS patients ever. It was approved in Europe, but not in the United States. Next slide, please. One of Haystack's groups already spoke on this example today, but is another glaring example that goes to the very heart of balancing potential risks and benefits. Next slide. And finally, perhaps a meeting you are considering, but not every application needs an AdCom. What every application does need is the FDA to consult with disease-specific experts and patients. The HART Act sought to address this by giving the agency the flexibility to speak with these groups during an interview. And galactosemia is a good example. It's a spectrum disease. There are different experiences by patients and clinicians and approaches to treatments and research. And the stakes are just too high to dismiss any information. It deserves discussion, and that cannot be spat out in 90 seconds during public comment. Next slide. There is also real value in considering how other review entities approach these problems. The EMA has piloted an approach here, and while not perfect, it's a start. Next slide. These are some of the details I'd like to discuss further offline. Next slide. In conclusion, the continuing disconnect and maybe even cognitive dissonance between what FDA does or says it can do and what we see happening has our community whipsawed. FDA staff tells us that its hands are tied with the statute when it comes to talking to patients, makeup of advisory committee meetings, conflict of interest and confidentiality. But then when we tried to change the statute, we are met with complete and total FDA opposition when technical assistance was provided to a bipartisan group of co-sponsors. Then informally at conferences, FDA staff pulls us aside and tells us that what we were asking for is much needed. So we hope today is the beginning of a conversation to identify statutory flexibilities with FDA that FDA needs and get this passed in Congress. Rare disease patients cannot wait for another PDUFA cycle. We are losing the lives of children every day. The time to act is now. Thank you for your time today, and my email is here so you can reach out and let's please continue this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kara, and sorry for the technical issues during your presentation. Before we take a short break, I want to give any speakers from this first segment who missed their slot a chance to speak. We did not have Joshua Habruski or Jean Pouble present on the line when they were called on. If either of you are on the line and are on the line, please use the raise hand function so our technical team can locate you and have you unmute. Again, that's Joshua and Jean who we are looking for. Going to give both of them one more minute. You don't want to miss the opportunity if they are on the line. Okay. Well, at this time, we are ready to take a short break. We are about halfway through topic 1. We will take, given that we are about 30 minutes ahead of where we thought we would be, we will take a 15-minute break instead of 10 minutes. So we will resume at 10:20. Thank you so much. Welcome back, everyone. I am Dale Crescencio. I'm today's moderator, and we are going to continue the open public comment for topic 1, composition of advisory committees. And again, this is the Food and Drug Administration's listening session, optimizing FDA's use of and processes for advisory committees. We're running a little bit in advance of time that we planned, so hopefully all of our speakers are available. Next slide. We're going to continue down the list. Our first speaker we have for the second segment of this first question is Stacy Gagosian.
Good afternoon, or I guess it's still morning. Good morning. I'm Stacy Gagosian, Senior Vice President of Public Policy at Truth Initiative. Truth Initiative is a national nonprofit public health organization committed to a future where commercial tobacco and nicotine addiction are a thing of the past. Our mission is to prevent youth and young adult nicotine addiction and empower quitting for all. Through our evidence-based Cessation X program and the nationally recognized Truth Public Education program, we are leading the fight against teen and young adult tobacco use as e-cigarettes threaten to put a new generation at risk of nicotine addiction. I thank the FDA for the opportunity to provide public comment on this topic. My comments today will obviously focus on the Tobacco Products Scientific Advisory Committee. First, I would like to discuss how consumer representatives, those who can represent and understand the populations that are most impacted by tobacco products and nicotine addiction, are included on the TPSAC. Youth and young adults are targeted by the tobacco industry, and this population represents future consumers of tobacco products, and unfortunately often represents current consumers of tobacco products, and therefore is a population that can provide a lot of insight and important information for FDA to understand. Therefore, we recommend that FDA consider incorporating youth and young adult voices to allow it to better understand how these products impact them. The youngest adults, those 18 to 24, are using tobacco products at some of the highest rates. It is important to note that for a significant portion of that population, they are still too young to legally purchase tobacco products. Having a young person on the TPSAC would help FDA understand from lived experience some of the questions that FDA is exploring. For example, how marketing impacts this group, how young people perceive these products, and what sorts of messages are effective in preventing use and encouraging cessation, particularly among young people. Understandably, most representatives on the TPSAC are scientists, which is as it should be. But I think it would be useful for both TPSAC members and FDA to hear from people who represent the populations most impacted by tobacco products as they are reviewing product applications, product regulations, etc., and how those products or actions will impact the communities most in need of protection from tobacco products. Similarly, it is important to ensure that African Americans, the LGBTQ+ community, and other populations that have suffered disproportionately from tobacco products and tobacco marketing also have a voice and ability to provide input to FDA as it considers products, regulations, and other actions. My next remarks are not technically about the composition of TPSAC, but I did want to take this opportunity to encourage FDA CTP to use TPSAC much more often. This committee, as envisioned but in the Tobacco Control Act that established it, is supposed to play a valuable role in the regulation of tobacco products, providing FDA with a wide range of scientific input on tobacco product applications, as well as insight into scientific questions FDA is grappling with regarding tobacco products or tobacco product regulations. We are concerned that FDA CTP is not using TPSAC as much as it should. The public nature of advisory committee meetings would be beneficial to all. as using TPSAC to discuss more questions that FDA is working on would increase transparency. A lack of transparency is something that has been identified as an issue in FDA CTP processes, and expanding TPSAC's meetings would be an important way to increase transparency. For example, we recommend FDA CTP should make more use of TPSAC in the pre-market review process. The MRTP, the Modified Risk Tobacco Product application process, requires the TPSAC to review each MRTP application. While this may not be necessary for every pre-market tobacco product application, there are likely to be some applications that require such a review, especially for novel products developed by industry and/or products that have potential to develop use among youth or other vulnerable populations. Further, it would be helpful for TPSAC to review questions about groups of applications that raise similar questions of public health. Involving TPSAC would also make the process more transparent. Again, this would be relatively simple to implement as TPSAC is already in place and has already reviewed MRTP applications. FDA CTP has the advantage of having top experts in tobacco-related research as voting members of the TPSAC. It should and must tap into that expertise, as well as expand that expertise to consumers such as youth, African Americans, and LGBTQ populations that are most impacted by tobacco products. Thank you for the opportunity to submit these oral public comments today.
Thank you so much, Stacy. Our next speaker listed is Mindy Cameron. I don't believe our tech has been able to locate her. Mindy, are you on the line? If you are here and we haven't found you, please use the raised hand function. I believe our next speaker, Leilani Doty, is also has also not been found by our technical team to be on the line. Leilani, if you are on the line, please use the raise hand function. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, but know that I will come back to those who haven't, who missed their slot at the end in case they're on the line. Our next speaker listed is Nicole Boshi. Nicole?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this public meeting. I am Nicole Boshi, the Director of Regulatory Affairs with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. Multiple sclerosis, or MS, is an unpredictable, often disabling disease of the central nervous system. Symptoms vary by individual and range from numbness or tingling to walking difficulties, fatigue, dizziness, pain, depression, blindness, and paralysis. The progress, severity, and specific symptoms of MS in any one person cannot yet be predicted. The National MS Society believes that patient experiences, preferences, and perspectives should play an important role in the FDA's decision-making process. The FDA has been instrumental in approving and regulating over 20 MS disease-modifying therapies, or DMTs. And we anticipate that therapies in the discovery pipeline will need to be carefully balanced and considered not only by the agency, but also by individuals living with MS. Therefore, the FDA must ensure that the voices of individuals are heard on advisory committees. Until we have cures for MS, the FDA will continue to play an important role for individuals living with MS, and their lived experiences need to be understood. People living with MS are the experts on their disease. They, along with their care partners and loved ones, hold valuable perspectives that can contribute to the design and structure of clinical trials, how patient data is collected, and what safety and efficacy metrics are meaningful to them. Additionally, this input will help ensure that treatment protocols have realistic requirements and that treatments and devices are designed to meet the needs of those living with a disease. To achieve the goal of being patient-centered, it is imperative that the FDA advisory committees authentically embrace feedback from those with lived experiences and not just check the box. Virtually all FDA-approved MS DMTs have their own benefit risk profiles. And although the potential effectiveness and safety risks of MS therapies are largely known, relatively little is known about how people living with MS and their care partners perceive and weigh any therapy's benefits and risk. This benefit risk trade-off is important to understand and to promote treatment adherence and improve quality of life. Listening to patients and care partners to understand their priorities and concerns is essential and should happen before any assumptions are made. This will prevent opinions from being formed based on implicit bias or stereotypes, and will ensure that patients' priorities are reflected. To understand patient priorities regarding quality of life, a diverse group of patients should be consulted to determine the aspects of the indicated condition that are most relevant to and have the greatest impact on the intended population. Different patient populations may have distinct tolerances for benefit risk decisions based on their specifics of their disease, stage of life, and availability of treatments. The Society appreciates the FDA's commitment to fostering patient-focused drug development, and has previously commented that we support the agency's directive that individuals, care partners, and patient groups should be consulted to determine what clinical outcomes are important to patients and what clinical trial study endpoints represent meaningful outcomes or improvement of disease. Finally, we encourage the FDA to promote diversity in the composition of advisory committees and to be mindful of social determinants of health. We urge the advisory committee meetings to accommodate those with physical limitations, including mobility, low vision, fatigue, and cognitive challenges. We also encourage those interacting with the patient community to use plain language and avoid medical jargon. To increase diversity, we encourage the use of translators so that those with limited English proficiency can participate. When more voices are heard and the experiences of a diverse group of patients and care partners are considered, we can work toward approving treatments that are not only safe and effective, but meet the needs of those living with the conditions we seek to treat. Thank you for your time and consideration. The Society will be submitting additional comments by the August deadline.
Thank you so much, Nicole. Our next speaker is Julie Heverly.
Good morning. My name is Julie Heverly. I'm the Senior Director with the Diatribe Foundation, an organization that is dedicated to ensuring that people living with diabetes have the resources and education needed to thrive with diabetes. I myself live with type 1 diabetes, a challenging and unpredictable disease. Since my diagnosis 25 years ago, I have hoped and advocated for treatments and technologies that will allow me and millions of others to be active, contributing members of society, and that will reduce the immense burden of fighting my own body 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. As FDA and its advisory committees consider potential new medical products and debate broader policies that impact access to innovative treatments, the needs of patients must be foremost. This includes regulators keeping pace with clinical standards of care and the reality of patients' daily disease management. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to participate in an advisory committee meeting. After that experience, I am grateful for the opportunity to share a few recommendations to more fully incorporate the voice of patients into future meetings, and to improve the understanding of the role of advisory committees in the drug review and approval process. Diatribe appreciates FDA's efforts in recent years to solicit information from patients about the burden of our diseases, our views on benefits and risks, and to incorporate those perspectives into drug review and approval. However, within the advisory committee process, a key step in drug review, the consideration of patient perspective too often appears cursory and disjointed. Today, many patients are highly educated and informed about our own disease states. We have valuable insights that the committee could consider to better utilize the expertise that only comes with this lived experience. First, we ask that the agency consider identifying and sharing in advance of the meeting a list of focused discussion topics and questions that would be most valuable to have addressed by patients in the open public hearing. We envision something similar to the discussion questions already provided to the committee members, but specifically honoring patient expertise and empowering commenters to prepare tailored feedback on topics that would be most relevant for the committee's consideration and the agency's ultimate approval decision. I, along with millions more, could speak for hours about the years of challenges that have shaped my lived experience. Patients should be allowed to offer insights outside these topics, but identifying specific questions for patients' input would make offering comments more approachable, especially for those less familiar with the advisory committee process. These topics should be provided in the committee meeting announcements. Along with FDA and applicant briefing documents, these additional topics and proposed patient-centered questions should be shared a minimum of 7 days in advance to allow for thoughtful input. Additionally, we suggest basic resources such as tutorials on the role of advisory committees, standard meeting process, and specifically how patient input is considered, weighed, and incorporated should be developed and evergreen in meeting documents. We truly appreciate that FDA has indicated that it intends to return to in-person advisory committee meetings. We believe that there is tremendous value in FDA and committee members hearing from patients firsthand. However, we would urge you to keep virtual options for patients whose illnesses, livelihoods, and travel situations may make it difficult or impossible to appear in person. To ensure that patients' perspective is top of mind throughout the committee's discussion, we suggest that the open public hearing portion of meetings should take place before the applicants or FDA's presentations. Additionally, as part of the committee's discussion and voting, members should be asked specifically how patient information informed their decision, whether the public comments or from patient preference information data provided in briefing materials and presentations. We believe that these steps would help elevate the reason that we are all here, to continue advancing treatment developments and approvals and ultimately improving health outcomes for millions of Americans. The voices of people living with diabetes, other diseases and conditions must be heard when advancing therapies and technologies and directly affecting our lives. As one of those people, I thank you for the opportunity to share my views and suggestions on how to ensure that those voices are lifted up in the advisory committee process.
Thank you so much, Julie. I believe our next presenter listed is not here, Richard Kovacs. So I'm going to move on to the next one on the list, who is Jamie Sullivan.
Hi, my name is Jamie Sullivan. Thank you for inviting me to present on behalf of the EveryLife Foundation for Rare Diseases in the rare disease community. Today's remarks reflect the engagements of a diverse coalition, our community Congress, around our shared experiences with FDA advisory committees. We're grateful for FDA's efforts to examine the role of its advisory committees and believe that some reform is necessary to ensure their use is serving the agency, patients, and our shared goals of safe and effective therapies reaching patients at the earliest opportunity. Ensuring there are experts on AdComs who understand how to design and interpret results from small population trials will help produce meaningful conversations to guide FDA's approach to analyzing data generated from innovative trial designs. Similarly, experts in social sciences, patient preference studies, and interpreting the use of patient experience data are often absent from AdCom discussions. Two additional stakeholders are essential to add for any rare disease product review: a clinician who is an expert in the condition for which the product is intended, and a patient community representative. When it is a pediatric disease, the perspective of a caregiver may serve as proxy, but when possible, both should be included. Moving beyond composition, to ensure meaningful rare disease-related AdCom discussions, it's necessary to reconsider how members' conflicts of interest are determined. While it's understandable that the agency upholds strict COI procedures in most cases, as many FDA leaders, including Commissioner Califf, have recognized, there is rarely an expert in a rare disease that does not spend time working on therapy development programs. There must be processes to allow these experts to contribute to the tough questions FDA reviewers are wrestling with reasonable guardrails in place to manage any potential conflicts. Similarly, COI reform is necessary to facilitate meaningful participation from a patient and/or caregiver representative. Increasingly, patient advocacy organizations are driving rare disease product development, and the engaged patients and families that lead them are well suited to identify and support patients who can meaningfully contribute. However, current processes lead to many being ruled out due to their roles in the community. One option to ensure consistent rare disease expertise is meaningfully incorporated into AdCom discussions, in addition to including temporary scientific, clinical, and patient expertise, is to establish a standing rare disease advisory committee. There is precedent for this approach, and in addition to supporting drug and/or device committees, the committee could also be called upon to provide guidance on emerging issues of importance to the field of rare disease. Moving on to advisory committee member engagement process enhancements. Advisory committee members need to be given more insight into how FDA approaches decisions related to regulatory flexibility on issues such as endpoint selection, clinical trial design, and evidence evaluation so that they can provide more meaningful insights. Training can also be enhanced by providing members with patient experience information when available in official documents like Voice of the Patient reports or readouts from listening sessions. Preparation alone will not be sufficient to optimize AdCom use. In line with comments from FDA leaders, we encourage changes to the AdCom agenda that will facilitate more in-depth discussions on tough issues in rare disease product development. One such change would be to identify a distinct time in the agenda to hear and discuss available patient experience data, including evidence collected by credible organizations such as patient advocacy organizations. If there was dedicated time for this discussion when it is available, it will only serve to enhance pre-competitive collaborations and build on the knowledge base in a particular disease. Consideration should also be given to the benefits of having a neutral facilitator in charge of AdCom meetings, a role currently filled by the chairperson, typically an expert scientist, not an expert in generating fair and meaningful conversation for informing regulatory decisions. Community members have witnessed AdCom discussions dominated by one member's perspective or meetings that were derailed by less than accurate concerns. Expert facilitators are used to manage conversations, pull out key points, and ensure objectives of the meetings are met. The FDA should consider the merits of deploying them for AdCom discussions too. Lastly, there are opportunities to enhance the open public hearing process. The limited time afforded to the OPH results in the agency conducting a lottery to award speaking slots. The lottery approach, while understandable, does not result in a diverse and representative array of perspectives. A more targeted approach would be a process to identify key stakeholder categories for each meeting and allot reasonable time for each. In cases then where demand outstrips availability for those spots, a lottery could be initiated. While time is limited, we'll provide additional comments and specific examples in the written submission, but we'd be remiss to close without encouraging the agency to broaden their inquiry into the tough questions that have been raised by FDA leaders and regulatory experts in public remarks, but were absent from the listening session agenda. That is, what are the questions and topics that advisory committees should be weighing in on in the first place, and when is their input most useful? As you consider additional topics this afternoon, we also emphasize the importance of transparency so that patients, sponsors, investors, and others understand the rationale behind any decisions that are not in line with AdCom discussions and can learn and adapt for the future. The stakes are too high, and the time is most precious commodity for the rare disease community. Thank you for the opportunity to touch on these issues, and we welcome future conversation.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Our next speaker is Stephen Carpin.
Hi, good morning. My name is Stephen Carpin. I'm the Senior Director for Regulatory Affairs for Breakthrough T1D, formerly JDRF International. Breakthrough T1D is the leading global type 1 diabetes, or T1D, research and advocacy organization with a mission to improve lives today and tomorrow by accelerating life-changing breakthroughs that treat, prevent, and ultimately cure T1D and its complications. We are guided by a single purpose. As we drive towards curing type 1 diabetes, we help make everyday life better for the people who face it. To this end, since our inception, we have funded over $2.5 billion of type 1 diabetes research, and by working closely with clinicians, researchers, product developers, regulators, and those living with T1D, we have driven nearly every major advance in drugs, devices, or cell therapies in T1D in the last 50 years. We believe the FDA serves a critical role in protecting the health of the public while also ensuring that innovative and life-changing products reach those who need them in a timely manner. As such, when seeking advice from advisory committees regarding specific medical products, it's critical the advisory committees comprise individuals with specific expertise of the relevant disease or condition. In our experience with type 1 diabetes, it's not uncommon to see clear differences in the views of those who are deeply involved with T1D care or research, those who aren't focused specifically on T1D, like cardiologists or statisticians, and those that actually live with the disease. In particular, we find the risk tolerance of those living with the disease to often be misaligned with the stated views of committee members. We recommend 2 actions to address this. Increase the patient perspective at advisory committee meetings and ensure the right experts participate on the committees. The influence of patient and caregiver perspectives on a product's benefits and risks to be outsized relative to those that do not live with the disease and the daily realities of it. Beyond the open public hearing, the patient voice could be amplified by including a patient panel discussion component to advisory committee meetings when appropriate, and by increasing the number of patient representatives on the committee. The Endocrinologic and Metabolic Drugs Advisory Committee Charter allows for subcommittees consisting of 2 or more committee members to be established to address specific issues of relevance. Subcommittees then make preliminary recommendations for the full committee to consider. We believe expanding the use of subcommittees, providing adequate time at full committee meetings to discuss their findings, and allowing non-committee member patient representatives to participate on subcommittees are viable mechanisms to increase the voice of patients or of disease-specific experts. Other opportunities to increase the representation of the community include providing briefing materials to the public earlier than the typical 2 business days before the meeting. The more time members of the public have to review meeting materials, the better they're able to provide comments to the committee for consideration during their discussion. Similarly, the more information that's made available to the public prior to the deadline to request an open public hearing presentation, which is often weeks before many meeting details are known, the better individuals can determine if they would like to provide oral comments. In our experience, the best and most appropriate experts are often not able to engage in the advisory committee process. We see 2 issues that drive this. The process of nominating individuals to serve on the committee is vague and unclear, and the conflict of interest requirements can be overly strict and hamper the ability of many experts to join the committee. We believe it is critical to closely scrutinize any real or potential conflicts of interest. However, the top leaders and experts in any field are often some of the best suited individuals to guide the development of new products. As a result, they often engage with industry or with product developers. By limiting their ability to participate in advisory committee meetings, some of the most important voices are left out of the discussion, and therefore the value of the opinions and the advice that the advisory committees provide to FDA can be diminished. Finally, we believe there are opportunities for FDA to expand the scope of topics for which advisory committee meetings are called. For example, the meetings could center on the development of new endpoints, innovative clinical trial design, or the use of novel technologies in clinical trials. Altogether, we believe there are ample opportunities to refine the current use of advisory committees for the betterment of patients. On behalf of Breakthrough T1D, I'd like to thank the FDA for its careful consideration of these comments. We appreciate the agency working to improve its use of advisory committees and look forward to supporting the agency in this work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Our next speaker is Steve Berman.
Good morning. I'm Steve Berman, Deputy Vice President of Science and Regulatory Affairs at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization, or BIO. BIO thanks the FDA for holding this virtual listening session today and for the opportunity to speak. BIO is committed to working with the agency on advancing reforms. BIO believes that it is critical that FDA appoints individuals to advisory committees who have the requisite expertise to consider the topics under discussion and provide expert advice to the agency. Currently, we are concerned that the FDA's conflict of interest policies often lead to the disqualification of key thought-leading scientists, physicians, and medical experts. Consequently, FDA advisory committee members may lack the necessary experience or expertise to effectively advise the agency on matters such as the safety, efficacy, and benefit risk assessment of investigational medicines. In addition to its permanent committee members, the FDA appoints additional advisors on an ad hoc basis to provide expertise for specific circumstances. While there has been some expansion in recent years in the number of members on advisory committees, there remains a shortage of experts in crucial areas such as rare diseases, technological innovations, and patient-specific topics. It is crucial to balance conflict of interest concerns with ensuring access to true experts, especially in complex areas like rare diseases or emerging technologies. With respect to ad hoc advisors, we believe they should be selected based on scientific expertise that is directly relevant to the product being discussed. Preference should not be given to ad hoc advisors simply because they have experience serving on previous advisory committees or have general expertise in the disease or technology area. The main focus of advisory committee dialogue should be on the relevant scientific and medical questions for which the agency seeks advice. We need the appropriate experts in the room to inform these discussions. Committee chairs play a key role in ensuring that discussions stay focused and relevant to the topic at hand and need to be skilled mediators and facilitators, in addition to being well-versed in the FDA's regulatory process to ensure the appropriate context for the committee's discussion. On question 2, we believe that there are many ways to ensure that FDA advisory committees can hear diverse perspectives. More robust and consistent use of FDA's existing waiver authority across CBER and CDER will enable broader representation and ensure critical experts are able to participate in advisory committee meetings, leading to a more appropriately informed discussion. We further believe that it would be helpful for FDA to provide a summary of docket comments to the advisory committee members in advance of meetings and to report on this summary at the meeting itself. Some people face physical, financial, or other barriers that prevent them from attending meetings in person. So while we support advisory committee meetings being held in person and think it is critical for committee members to participate in this way, we also support meetings routinely providing opportunities for remote participation and viewing to accommodate those other stakeholders who are unable to travel, particularly for the open public hearing. Speakers who elect to participate virtually in the open public hearing should be given the opportunity to be on camera. Such steps will ensure that ACs are more inclusive. On question 3, there are several ways in which FDA can better incorporate the patient voice specifically, and BIO believes that it is important to do so. The biotechnology industry is committed to listening to and incorporating the patient perspective throughout drug development, including study design and endpoints, and helping drug sponsors and the FDA understand the burden of disease on patients. There should be a clearly defined and consistent process for inclusion of patient representatives in advisory committees. Currently, there is no standard for how many patient representatives can participate, leading to some meetings with only one patient representative on the panel and others with multiple patients, given the impression that some advisory committees place greater value on patient participation than others. We recommend patients with relevant disease experience be included in advisory committee meetings, as well as individuals from representative patient advocacy groups. We should also broaden patient representation, not have the same voices each time, to help ensure that both the advisory committee and FDA are hearing from many voices. Additionally, as it is critical for FDA to consider its conflict of interest policies with respect to clinical experts, FDA should also similarly revisit COI policies related to patient representative and patient advocacy groups. Patient advocacy groups frequently receive much needed support from industry partners in their specific disease area. Patients do have the opportunity to submit comments to the open public docket established for each advisory committee meeting. The FDA institutes a firm deadline for the submission of comments in advance of the meeting to facilitate the committee's review. However, it is not clear whether and how these comments are actually provided to committee members. We recommend that the comments submitted to the docket before the FDA's deadline be routinely included as a component of the committee's prep materials. We also request that there be greater transparency of how patient comments submitted to the docket are provided to the advisory committee. FDA could help advisory committee members understand the main themes being expressed by patients and also share those with the sponsor. This would help ensure that advisory committee members see and appreciate patient perspectives. Thank you, and we welcome future conversation on this important topic.
Thank you so much, Steve. Our next speaker is Karen Fernandez.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am a DES daughter, I was exposed to the drug diethylstilbestrol in utero in 1949, and my mother took the Smith and Smith regime. And I have been suffering the consequences of my in utero exposure for my entire life. I am the administrator of DES Info Association, and we have over 2,000 members that are with us for education and support. We feel it's very important to have the DES exposed population as part of your advisory committees when you're looking at drugs that are approved by the FDA. A little bit of history. DES was approved by the FDA in 1941 for use in lactation and suppression. In 1947, it was given approval for use in pregnancy. In 1959, it was banned for the use in chickens and lambs. In 1962, it was declared ineffective for pregnancy. In 1971, there was a drug bulletin saying it was not for use. However, in 1974, the Wall Street Journal said 11,000 prescriptions were prescribed in 1974. This leads us to wonder if we have exact numbers of those exposed to the drug diethylstilbestrol for use in pregnancy, lactation suppression, growth of tall girls, and victims of rape. Their involvement with committees is very important because, first of all, we know about the risk for reproductive cancers and vaginal cancer, but new conditions have been identified by the NIH and the NCI that we are at increased risk for, and those are diabetes, cardiovascular disease, coronary artery disease, myocardial infarction, high cholesterol, hypertension, brittle bones and fractures, risk of gallbladder disease, ADHD in the third generation, hypospadias in the third generation, pancreatic disorders and malignancies, osteoporosis, early menopause, spinal degeneration, and endometriosis. So there are more things to be considered. Increased money is needed in research for this drug that had been approved by the FDA. There is education needed for the medical staff and healthcare providers who think that this DES is over. We are still alive. So we need more research. We need more research looking at the DES exposed DES daughters and sons in the third generation. We also need to look closely at the electronic medical record. It would be very simple to put in there a question: are you DES exposed, or do you have a family history of DES exposure? Also, what is important, we submitted last week some ICD-10 codes. We have no ICD-10 codes to identify the DES exposed population, and I'm sure that's going to be discussed in future meetings. Having the patients and families part of these committees is very, very important. When we had in 1990 a bill passed for the 101st Congress, they invited the DES exposed to be part of the research, and that was probably early on, and it's needed even more. We also need to examine the epigenome for the DES exposed population. So we have great needs. We need education for healthcare providers. That is essential. The DES exposed population are very tired of being dismissed, saying that this is over, and the physicians do not know about the care and screening that we need. When you look at protocols that are published, down the bottom in a very small piece, those are at higher risk, the DES exposed. So we need a major education campaign again. We need ICD-10 codes. We need the electronic medical record to capture data on the DES exposed population. And I thank you for your time today and allowing me to speak. There's lots to be done for the DES exposed population, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. I don't believe the next person who is listed, Andrew Kolodny, is present, but I'm just going to pause for a moment just in case he is. Okay, moving on. I also don't believe that our next two speakers who are listed, Sung Poblete and Nina Nizar, are present, but I will pause again to see if either of them are on the line. Please raise your hand. I also want to give a chance to any of our other speakers from this entire morning segment who missed their speaking slot to be recognized and speak. If you missed your speaking slot this morning, please raise your hand so our technical team can unmute your line and we can introduce you. And I'll just pause for a moment.
Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Can you hear me? Am I being heard?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Thank you for this opportunity to get to speak this morning, this afternoon. I can't thank my previous commenters enough. I think the points you covered have all been spot on, and all I really want to add is, as a long-term rare disease patient caregiver in a rare disease, I can't begin to tell you how important this era of drug development is. We've arrived at a time when we're actually being able to address and treat and sometimes even cure some of these rare conditions. And I know the complexity of these diseases is difficult. I know that there's not as much known about them, but having the expertise in the room and having expert panelists to understand what only people in the community can understand, I think that's just really the one thing that I wanted to add. I know in my experience from the Duchenne muscular dystrophy world that we do have a lot of people who aren't selected to speak at AdComs submit comments. And I would like to just add that in addition to everything that everyone that's gone before has said, that I would really like to see us make sure those comments are read and that they are accounted for. People spend a lot of time and emotion to tell you what it's like to live with these conditions. So I think reading everything that's submitted is really important. You know, some of the things that have gone, I don't love the lottery system, but I think better assurances that experts in these diseases are actually sitting on these panels. It would be a great step forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for the record, please state your name and affiliation because we don't have you on our list.
I'm Mindy Cameron. I'm a 20-year caregiver for Duchenne muscular dystrophy.
Thank you so much, Mindy, for jumping in. Are there any other speakers who missed their slot who we can recognize now? Okay, great. Well, thank you to all of the presenters for topic 1, the composition of advisory committees. This concludes our first segment of the public meeting. We are running a bit ahead of schedule since some of our speakers were unavailable, and we want to stay close to the published schedule, but I also don't want to take a 2-hour lunch break because I think that's a bit much. So we are going to take a lunch break at this time, and we're going to reconvene instead of at 1 p.m., we're going to reconvene at 12:30 p.m. Thank you so much, and we will see you back after lunch.